Recruitment Startup Hub. We're delighted to be joined by a selection of our partners today who will be talking to you around stage 2 of being a successful recruitment business. I'll be introducing some of our partners to you shortly, but to give you an overview of how today will run, we're very much going to be focusing on the title in which you should be expecting, which is all around protecting, ensuring and retaining talent within your recruitment business to give you the best opportunity to move through a high growth scale and maybe even a possible sale as well. Our partners have got a huge amount of experience within the industry, and hopefully we can harvest some of that in today's webinar. This webinar is going to be the tip of the iceberg of some of the support that you can get from our partners on today's session. If you have any questions that you want to ask, please do put them through in the chat facility or the Q&A facility, and I'll try and bring those into today's webinar. Alternatively, if you want to make contact with any of our partners, you can do so via the Recruitment Startup Hub ecosystem, which is available online. All of our partners are more than happy to have a one-to-one session with anybody on today's webinar at a time that's convenient for you both. So please do make use of that if you feel that that would be helpful. So to introduce some of our partners, I'm going to start with myself. So I'm Vincent Seddon, Customer Director here at Simplicity. Simplicity is a trusted finance and back office provider to the recruitment industry. And we've been in business for 20 years. We're celebrating our 20th year this year. So we're delighted to provide, hopefully, a little bit of those 20 years of experience within this webinar today. Also delighted to be joined by Danny Nield from Partners and. Danny is the recruitment and umbrella specialist broker at Partners and, currently reigning insurance broker of the year. So not only are they a specialist, they're also award-winning as well. And they provide specialist insurance, employee benefits, risk management, and claims advice to businesses and private clients. So if you're interested in insuring your business or identifying any opportunities of support, please do reach out to Danny or maybe even ask a question throughout today's webinar. We're also joined by Simon Whitehead from Brabners. Simon is a partner and head of recruitment workforce solutions at Brabners. Brabners is a full-service law firm that works nationally supporting recruitment businesses and their owners to navigate and avoid any legal issues. So hopefully you don't get to that point, but if you do find yourself needing some legal advice, Simon is absolutely the person to reach out to. We're also joined by Cathy O'Donoghue from HR Champions. Cathy is the owner and MD from HR Champions. They provide first-class HR and employment law support, along with advice to UK employers. They're also an ILM and City and Guilds accredited HR company, delivering leadership and management training suitable for all organisational levels. So anything in relation to employee management, retaining talent, Cathy and her team are absolutely the place to go. And finally, Ian Knowlson from Talence. Ian is the CEO and founder of Talence, providing coaching, training and development globally within recruitment, along with talent management and also supporting the sales arena. So I'm sure you will agree, some absolutely fantastic partners to be supporting us on today's webinar. Today's webinar is very much going to be a bit of a panel event. We're going to be asking lots of questions that have been pre-supplied by some of our attendees today. But as I said, if you have got any questions that you would like answering in today's session, then please do pop them in the chat facility or the Q&A. So let's get started. One of the key things that we focus on at the moment is being successful within your first 24 months of business. And that covers a range of different things. We've already covered how to get started, where to start with your business development, where you might find good candidates and clients. So today we're going to start at stage 2, which is very much around protecting, ensuring and growing your business through to a successful and sustainable recruitment business. So let's have a look at what risks might be involved. A really great question to start us off was sent in, and it reads from, where do you currently see the main risks and exposures to our industry? And how can agencies, whether new or established, protect against these? So I think with this being around protection and providing an overview of risk, I'd like to start off today's webinar by coming to you, Danny, from your perspective around mitigating risks and then potentially insuring against that. And then we'll come to some of our other partners for their perspective as well.
Yeah, thank you, Vincent, and good afternoon, everybody. For any of those that were here for the webinar we did in September, we did start it looking at what the basics insurance covers and protections are that you need as a new startup. So I won't elaborate too much any further on that, but you do need employer's liability cover, public liability, and professional indemnity. Well, as that, which is pretty standard, which I'm pretty any established business will have that in place already. Now, as the business continues to grow, and certainly some of the risks that we're seeing within your sector at the moment, surround the anything to do with HMRC, which is probably not unusual and will continue to be an issue, and cyber security as well. So, just with regards to HMRC, which, as I say, it's a constant headache, really. But there's a particular policy that you can help to protect your business from any investigations, and that's directors and officers. So that is quite a wide scope of cover that will provide you as a director or any senior individuals within the business for any legal defence costs. But more specifically on HMRC investigations, there are particular policies that you can expand that cover to protect you in the event of an investigation that comes in from HMRC, and that will provide the costs of that investigation. So really you want to make sure that that cover and the advice you are receiving in respect of that will cover that element off as well. It is really important, and it is super relevant for your industry. Cyber, the next one, is it's an ever increasing and changing exposure that exists to every business, really. But specifically with recruitment, because of the nature of what you guys hold in respect to personal data, you are a target for criminal activity from a cyber perspective. So you want to make sure that the policies that you have in place are relevant for that. And currently at the moment, the cyber attackers are focusing on ransomware, and they're focusing on illegal transfer of funds as well. But ultimately, if you do suffer a cyber attack, it will affect not only the running of your business, but the hardware as well. So really want to make sure that the policies that you have in place do encompass those exposures that you have. But really, the insurance is the backstop. So you want to make sure the risk management that you have in place protects you from any attack anyway. So, and that is one of the things we work with Simplicity and their customers to provide some free risk management advice as well.
Great, thanks, Danny. I think that gives a kind of top level overview there of some of the key risks that recruitment agencies need to be aware of, and that the digital arena and the cyberspace is increasingly more complicated as the days go on. So if one of our attendees on the call today is looking for some support and guidance around that, is that something that they can come to you for to get a little bit more detail, get a step-by-step process of what they need to put in place?
Absolutely. So yeah, I won't get too much into the detail as conscious of time, and obviously have the panel members on today. But yeah, to answer your question, Vincent, please do come through to me, and we can do some quite nifty risk management support and also that insurance cover as well.
Bypass the IP.
Sorry? I don't know what, I think we had a little stray voice there, so apologies for that. Thanks, Danny. Simon, I'm going to come over to you, if I may. We've heard from Danny around insuring against some of these risks that we might find. But what about if a recruitment agency found them in themselves in a little bit of risk and they didn't have the insurance in place, and they may be looking to face some legal representation? What do you feel are the main risks and exposures to recruitment agencies from a legal perspective at the moment?
Well, there are lots. Ultimately, I'd echo what Danny said in respect of cyber attacks. We've seen quite a lot of that, because if you think, as he said, with regards to personal data, but actually probably more problematic is the amount of money that passes. Obviously, if you're paying out a payroll, then that's a good form of attack, and we've seen some quite hefty claims in respect of that recently. So we've just recovered over £1 million for a client who was attacked, whose the CFO was cloned, and the payroll or the finance department of the client paid the cyber attackers ultimately the £1 million, £1.1 million worth of payroll for that particular week. And it's the contracts that ultimately then help you in that situation. So we were able to rely on the contractual terms in respect of that to show that they've been in breach of contracts and been negligent ultimately in making the payments and not making the checks when the hacker got in touch to say, here you go, there's a change in bank account, this is the new bank account details. I know, actually, can you pay us in dollars now rather than pound sterling? And the finance person at the client paid over £1.1 million in dollars to a new bank account without doing any checks whatsoever. So robust contracts ultimately are crucial if you're going to grow and thrive. And like we always say, really, with legal contracts, is you hope that you put them in the bottom drawer and you never have to pull them out and look at them. But actually, when you do have to pull them out and look at them, that's when you realise and are thankful that you've done things properly and you've tried to cover off all eventualities. And none of us have got crystal balls. None of us know everything that's going to happen when you're running a business. But there are some common core areas where you want your contracts ultimately to cover. So making sure that you've thought about the contracts is really key. Lots of businesses, as they start out, look to make sure that they are not overspending where they feel that they don't need to overspend. So may take contracts that they've found on the internet or that they've previously used without really thinking, is it suitable and adequate for the supply that you're making? And that might be, when you start off, that might be acceptable to you from a risk perspective. But as you grow, as your clients grow in stature, as your income grows and the value of your contracts grow, then really a properly drafted contract is absolutely key in making sure you're protected. And even if you want another reason to sort of make sure that your contracts are fit for purpose, when you come to sort of realize the value in your business, so you come to look to find someone to buy it, or you're looking for investment to continue to grow, that's the one thing that any investor, any purchaser is going to look at your contractual terms and make sure that the business that they're investing in or that they're acquiring is properly protected from a legal perspective. So better to do that as you go rather than having to sort of play catch up when you get to a point of sort of looking to the future and potentially exit or investment. And you can't really underestimate just how important that is. And as I say, sometimes you might look at that and think, well, actually, is it a waste of money? And potentially it is, because obviously if nothing ever happens and you never need to pull the contracts out of the bottom drawer, then it's not. But ultimately, a bit like Danny said, it's ultimately an insurance policy or product that you've got there to make sure that if the worst happens, you've got some ability to protect the business and to recover what you're duly owed.
Simon, that's quite fascinating to listen to some of those scenarios that you mentioned there, and I'm sure there's a lot more that you can talk to us about some of those individually. You also mentioned around protecting the exit, so we'll probably come back to that when we get a little bit further into today's webinar, because I think that's crucially important at this stage. Whilst some of our agencies might not be at that level, that's certainly where some of them might want to get to. And just also touching upon some of the risks there, specifically from our perspective, from a finance and back office perspective, we have noticed quite an increase on attempted fraud recently. So one of the key things that we would want all agencies to be vigilant about is the level of fraud that can be attracted to our industry. And that can be where recruitment agencies are the victim of fraud. And it might be that you are contacted by a client that says to you that they have a book of work that they perhaps want to move over to you, and it needs to be payrolled next week. My advice to you would be, if it sounds too good to be true, it likely is. So make sure that you conduct your due diligence, because it'll be you that's liable for those funds that are outstanding when you find out that those workers are actually ghost workers. So I'm happy to talk more about that in a separate conversation, but hopefully that gives you a little bit of food for thought when it comes to client due diligence and checking out the opportunity that's available. Okay, so we've spoken about ensuring your business, protecting your business, some of the key things that might be of risk in terms of finance. Let's talk about people. So Cathy, I'm going to come to you now. So I think from your perspective, we're going to talk very much about the people within the business. So what are the key things that our agencies need to be aware of when they're looking to protect their business from a people perspective?
Thank you, Vincent. Actually, just before I start on that, I just wanted to just reference through to directors' responsibilities. And quite often we get so excited when we're setting up a new business that you register yourself on Companies House and to sort of say that you're there and in existence, but just making sure that you do understand what those directors' responsibilities are. And then in particular, that's reinforced with employment legislation about directors and senior owners of organisations, their responsibilities. And actually, there's a really good piece of legislation that's just on its way out now, which is the Worker Protection Act, which is about protecting your workers from sexual harassment in the workplace, because there's been a real flurry of inappropriate behaviour claims coming through. But the key thing about that act is that the owner stroke directors of the organisation are culpable for not taking reasonably practical steps to look after and protect their staff from sexual harassment in the workplace. So when we sort of position things from a people perspective in that way, it just brings back and crystallizes for me the fact that if you're an employer and you choose to take on people to work for you, you need to make sure that you adhere to the legislation and the regulations that are there in place to protect people in your organisation. You're not above it. Everybody is included in it. So some of the first things is about making sure that you have policies in place that support people within your workplace, and just referencing it back to that particular one. But, you know, an equality, diversity and inclusion policy would be an absolute must as a first place, but there are many more. But making sure you've got the right policies in place to support your organisation, your people and the culture. Obviously, you need to make sure you do your checks. People in the recruitment agency know all about the right to work checks, so you know those inside out. But make sure that just because it's your business, you don't forget to do them, because you're just excited to get that extra person on board. When offering a person, you'll be familiar with the fact of making sure they've got a contract of employment. And I frequently hear that people say, oh, yes, well, you know, they haven't started yet, so I haven't given them their contract of employment. Contracts of employment should go out with an offer letter. We should be saying to the person, here's your offer. This is the terms and conditions that we're offering you with that offer letter. So the person can look at the whole terms or written particulars of the job that they're accepting, because they're giving up something to come to you. So make sure it's really transparent and clear. You shouldn't have anything to hide. But also, you may need to fall back on that if there are any claims at a later stage. So they should be offered like I said, with an offer letter, at the very least within 8 weeks of somebody starting within the organisation. One of the top tips I'd have at the moment is about ensuring that once you've made the offer, and not before the offer, but once you've made the offer and the person's accepted the position, I'd be sending out a health assessment form for somebody. So sending a form out that says, okay, talk to us and tell us if you have any underlying health issues, and then invite them into a meeting that says, okay, this is what you put down in your form. We'd really like to understand what that means about you being fit and able to do the job that we have here. We described it well in the advert and the job description. And now we want to understand whether or not we need to make any reasonable adjustments to enable you to be able to do that job the best that you possibly can in our organisation. And by having that sorted right at the beginning, you can make those adjustments. Maybe it's a different chair, maybe it's a desk that lifts up and down, whatever it is, you know right from the beginning, and you can work with the person to help them to train and develop to be able to do the job in your organisation, similar to the things that you'd cover with your HSE. The last thing I'd like to sort of say before I let you move on to somebody else, Vincent, is it's about making sure that you have really robust induction procedures. So making sure that you do a really thorough company induction. And in that induction, you're laying out things like, this is how we work around here. This is the health and safety. This is our dignity at work. This is how we expect you to behave when you work with us. So everybody's really clear of what good looks like right at the beginning, but also making sure that they understand what will happen to them on that journey, because so many people, and this figures are quite staggering about how many people are leaving within the first 90 days of being employed by a new organisation. And this is, I believe, as a result of potentially at times not making sure we've got the right person, not recruiting them for values and attitude. And secondly, not doing a good job of inducting them into the organisation and then training them to do their job. Very often we hear, I was just so grateful they were here. I was able to give them some work to do, and then I didn't actually spend any time training them to do their whole job. we've just trained them to do a third of it maybe, because that frees us up time to do something else. Well, that's going to come back and bite you on the bottom at some later stage if we don't, you know, make it robust right from the very beginning.
Thanks, Cathy. I think that that kind of brings together quite nicely, setting the ground rules, being upfront, open and honest with our employees, and setting out that onboarding journey. And I'm sure there will be people in the audience today that have had that happen to them or been that person. So I'm sure we can all relate to that. And we've definitely got a lot to learn. Cathy, we're going to come back to you a little bit later on to talk about how we need to focus on retaining the talent when we look at sale. So that will hopefully allow us to look at the whole journey there of our people. Ian, I'm aware that you've been very patiently waiting. I'd like to actually move on to growth with yourself. But before we do so, I'm heavily aware that you are invested into people as well, and spend a lot of time with some of our great people from onboarding through to training them to be great at their role. So is there anything that you might want to add there on the back of what Cathy has just given to us?
I'd endorse everything that Cathy just said, 100%. And I'd actually probably add a little bit more. I think we said there's about 40 to 50 people on this webinar or are registered for it. I expect a number of those to be directors who have been promoted. And the point that Cathy made about responsibility to directors is, so often when people get promoted, they aren't aware of the director responsibilities that Cathy's just talked about. So one of us can probably put the link in the chat, or we can mail it out, that's on the company's house that Cathy's referring to, because she's 100% right. The example I normally give is slightly different to the one that Cathy gives, but when you are a director in a business, you're responsible for the health and safety of people in that building. So if somebody's got a cable dangling across the floor and you're a consultant, your liability is far, far less than if you were a director. And I think the most important thing is some directors' responsibilities are personal. In other words, if there is injury, or there's loss, there is fraud, that you can be sued as a person, not just in your position as a director of that company. So Cathy's point there is very powerful.
Ian, can I just ask a very quick question there, just to make sure that we're clear on what we refer to as a director, because some people may have that in their job title, but we're referring to directors appointed via Companies House of the business.
Correct.
Yeah.
But again, my understanding, and Cathy's probably more of an expert, and so is Simon on this, is that if you go to an employment tribunal and you've got the name director after you, the employment tribunal will treat you slightly differently than if you've just got the job of a manager, even if you are not registered at Companies House.
Yeah, and there's the concept as well as shadow directors.
Yeah.
So that's basically holding yourself out as a director. So a director has a defined term in as much as you are sort of recorded at Companies House as a formal director of the business. And there's no argument then in respect of what is your status, what is your position in that company. But if you have director in your job title, then there is doubt and uncertainty. So the question that a court would look at is, well, if someone comes along and talks to you and you hold yourself out in your email footer or on your business card as a director of the business, and you don't explain that that's not a Companies House director, then ultimately can they assume that you have that position? And the answer a lot of the time is yes, you can. So you do need to be careful when you create job titles, because you may be overstretching the mark slightly and you know, incurring exposure to liability that isn't intended by anyone involved in the business at all. So you do just need to be careful of that, because shadow directors and responsibilities do exist ultimately.
Simon, I think I'd actually quite like you to be permanently on my screen, so I can just literally press a button and say, Simon, what do you think of this? I'd love that. So if you could think about making a ChatGPT version of you, that would be great. Yeah. Anyway, well, sorry, thank you. Back to
the world's quite ready for that.
Simon's given you the legal answer to the one that I gave you, which is slightly That's exactly the answer that I was expecting him to give.
Great. So it's almost like you teed him up for that, Ian. Thank you for
Yeah,
that.
well,
That was not planned, by the way, to all of our audience.
Go on, you wanted to ask me another question?
Yes, so thank you for kind of finishing off the people side here. So Ian, from yourself, I think what we want to explore now is we've looked at insuring our business, we've looked at protecting our business, and we've also looked at retaining great talent within our business. So hopefully we should all have our ducks in a row at this stage. So at this stage, we would assume that a business is almost ready to grow. Whether that's grow rapidly, sustainably, however you want to look at it. But we're in a position where we want to grow a successful business. So I guess really it's what your key advice and guidance would be to a business at this stage where they're looking to actually start to grow the business, grow the profitability, think about sale.
So any business that's moving towards an event, events can be three things. I'm going to use generic terms, general terms, otherwise we could spend hours just talking about what happens. So one is an event is where you sell your business to an industry sale. So that means if you're in logistics recruitment, you might sell your recruitment business to somebody who wants to get into logistics or to a competitor. Okay. The other event is where you sell it to your own staff. And the third event is where you sell it to a venture capitalist or somebody who wants to invest in your business. And then you accelerate your growth and you go to a second event, which typically happens 3 to 5 years after your first sale. So that's the three events typically. There are others and variances of that. Your valuation of your business will be based around EBIT. Again, I can talk about that in more detail if people want to put questions around that. And there will be a multiplier. So businesses that are heavily permanent, probably very little temp, probably don't get much of a multiplier. And there are a whole raft of other things that go into what affects your multiplier, your management, your structure, everything that, you know, the guys have just talked about, Cathy, Simon and Dan have all just talked about. All of those things, when you move towards an event, will affect the valuation of your business. Contracts is, I was only talking about this yesterday with a customer. Retention of your staff is very important, your ability to lead and develop people. So all of those things are important. But what people are looking at is if I, put it simply, if I'm a VC or I want to invest in your company and I'm about to give you £500,000 or £1 million, what will you do with that money and what can I reasonably expect to get back, or we reasonably expect to get back in a period of time? So will you go into new markets? Are you going to expand in the markets you're in? Are you going to recruit more of the people that you've got? Have you got a good leadership development program? Have you got a good consultancy development program? Or is your growth predicated on pinching good caliber consultants from your competitors? Because if that's the case, then an inhibitor to growth is your competitor's ability to grow staff that you can pinch. And if they start talking to Cathy, Dan and Simon about how to retain their staff, then your growth plans might go out the window. But then how you move into your market will depend on a whole raft of other things. And have you got a scalable strategy? And there are very few companies that have had sustainable growth consistently over the last 2 years. There's normally, most of them have suffered some economic, but there are some sectors where that economic downturn hasn't been as great. So the sectors that have been the most dominant for the last 5 to 10 years, and they would be life sciences, technology, IT, professional services, so things like engineering, a number of those have really suffered in the last 2-3 years. Whereas things like logistics, which went up and down during COVID in violent swings, have probably been relatively consistent, but it depends how much of that business is geared towards retail, which has been affected, and how much is it towards supporting business. So I could talk about this for hours, but that just gives you some quick headlines around where you're at. And it depends what the audience is interested in. So if people have got specific questions around that, please put them in the chat, and then we can
Ian,
address.
just a quick couple of questions on the back of what you've said there. So just going back to the business valuation, I'm thinking of Dragon's Den type environment here. And quite often we hear some of the dragons say, oh, you know, where on earth have you got that number from? So I guess for some of our audience, and I can see some responses coming in, is there a quick and easy way of valuing a business?
No, not really. If the truth be told, your accountant will be able to give you an EBIT number. So everybody should be able to get an earnings before interest and taxation and dividends and EBITDA to be precise. But the multiplier is really, it depends on what is attractive and appealing to the market, and it's and often one. You know, if you were selling to a Reed, for example, or a Hayes, one business might value put you a higher multiplier than another. So, for example, in 2000, when I worked for a business that got acquired by Hayes, it wasn't necessarily the profitability of our business. We were very profitable, but they were particularly interested in buying the company I worked for because of the leadership team. And that would supplement the Hayes IT leadership team that was there. And my
various different factors then.
So some people might pay a premium. It's a little bit like buying to talk in your terms, a racehorse, you know, or to talk in terms of a football.
Yeah, definitely not the football in my case. But,
no,
yeah,
but I thought in Dan's case, it's the Merseyside derby tonight. So whether he's a red or a blue, and United are playing City in the cup final. So, you know, that's another thing.
Never talk politics or football, they say. Come on, Ian. So I think in answer to some of the questions that we've had coming in around valuation is definitely you need to go and do your research, and you need to speak to some of the industry experts. And I suppose it comes down to your business is worth what somebody's willing to pay, in essence. But if you want to find out yourself, you need to go and do some homework. Is there anybody else that wants to add to that in terms of business valuations? Nope. Okay. So the last question for yourself, Ian, before we move back around the process, is around sustainable growth. So you mentioned that some industries have seen impact whilst others have seen growth. One of the questions that we continuously get asked is, should you take yourself down one industry route and be very good at that, or should you spread your risk across several?
Great question. And if you were to ask 6 growth coaches like me, they'd all give you 6 different answers. Really helped you. But the answer I would give is it depends what those sectors are. So, for example, if you were going to go into, let's talk about one that's fairly easy to have. If you were to go into renewable energy right now, because that is a market that's not serviced well, then you would probably find that's quite appealing. But equally, it's a very difficult market to get into because it's got very, very scarce skills. The skills that are available tend to be ones that are willing to work across international borders. So if you've got somebody building a wind turbine in the North Sea, they might actually be physically in the water all the time, but they could be moving from one country's territorial waters to another on the same project. And I don't want to go into a whole complicated set of tax rules around that, but that can create them, depending how many months or days of the year they spend in the European Union or in the Netherlands, and how many they spend in the UK, can create a whole raft of problems. And if they're limited company operators, then as a freelancer, if they themselves are in a country for over, typically it's 182 days, but the rules can change, then their limited company has moved to the Netherlands, even if they say it's currently registered with their accountant in Harrogate. It doesn't work that way. And Simon right now will be thinking, could be a fair bit of money on this one, because there's a lot of money in defending freelancers that have made that mistake. So it's not quite as simple as that. You can't just go into it. And as the guys have said, you need to have all the insurance, you need to have all of the tax regimes nailed down. And from a HR point of view, Cathy would be saying, well, you know, we need to have different employee handbooks for somebody living in the Netherlands opposed to the UK.
Okay, so in terms of the question around industry, there isn't really a straightforward answer. It all very much depends on the scenario that we're looking at. Ian, thank you very much. We'll come back to you towards the end, because I know you've got a little surprise for some of our guests that you may want to let them know about. So Danny, I'm coming to you, back to you from a growth perspective. So we've got to the point where we're looking at growth. They've had a conversation with Ian. They've got a bit of a plan in place. What key things do they need to consider from an insurance perspective, and any tips that you might give when they're at that point of getting ready to grow and then putting it into place?
Sure, Vincent. Yeah. Excuse me. I'm a Liverpool fan, by the way, so probably tell, but I have a smile quite often. Anyway, we won't do football. So yeah, from the insurance perspective, I think one thing. I mean, I've listed a load of different covers that we recommend a company would have anyway. I think what sometimes gets missed with this is how you portray yourself as a business to any potential or even existing clients that you have, because they would like to see that you understand risk. You know, the business is protected, and the type of insurance that you have does portray you the business in a professional manner. So as you continue to grow and to move into the different sectors, you want to consider that, but also you want to have an insurance policy in place that allows flexibility. So to use one of the examples of Ian's as a particular sector, you know, if you're looking at logistics, you want driver's negligence cover. You know, if you're going into offshore, you want to make sure that the policy that you have allows for that. So yeah, it's around that sort of flexibility as well as that portraying a professional business. I want to just talk about people for a bit as well, because obviously they are a core part of the success of a business as well, and in particular retaining staff. So as you grow as a business, you know, you've nurtured these individuals, you've developed them. What you want to then avoid is that they get attracted away by some larger company, one of your competitors, that is offering a bit more than what you would currently as a small developing business or an SME. So the things that you need to consider with that, and you know, we do hear a lot about the younger generation, which you know forms quite a large part of the recruitment sector, is they're not as interested with salaries and bonuses. I'm sure that does help, but they're also interested in what the employer can offer as a package of benefits. So obviously bringing it back to insurance, some products that you might want to consider, which are becoming standard as part of benefits package these days, are things like cash plans. So this is an insurance policy that provides expenses for things like dental cover, eye test, 24/7 GPs, group life protection, which is a cover that provides that kicks in the event of death. Now, again, looking at that sort of younger demographic, you might think it's not as relevant, but a lot of these guys will be looking at getting mortgages shortly, if not already. So to have things like that as part of their package, you know, it just helps you as, you know, as the employer maintain and retain these staff against your competitors. But also, if you're not at that stage yet, where you've got a load of staff, or you're considering the cost of these additional benefits for the staff, you need to make sure that those important people within the business are protected. And key man, as we called previously, but a key person cover is key to that. So this is a cover that will protect the directors, senior individuals within the business, but also any of your top billers as well. So that is another. That's probably something that you want to consider really from the early stage of the business, but more so as you grow throughout the journey as well.
Great, thanks, Danny. I'm just going to change the way in which we come around and coming to you next, Cathy, actually, to stick with people, if that's okay. And then Simon, we'll finish off with yourself from a legal perspective. So Cathy, over to yourself in terms of that growth journey.
I'd like to start really by Danny just picking up on one of the points that you made and how relevant reward packages need to be these days and how flexible they need to be. And in my experience in the smaller organisations, those health cash plans are really, really important to people. They love to be able to say how much they've claimed back on their dental care and their opticians or their physio or something. And actually, if you have got people who've got back issues in the workplace, having a plan like that means you can quickly refer them to the 24/7 doctors if they can't get into their doctors, so they can get some diagnosis quickly. You can then also get them to go and have a chiropractor or physiotherapy, which they can claim back 100% of, which means then any ill health that they've got along those lines, they can seek support for it quickly at very little or minimum cost to themselves. Obviously, there might be a P11D issue with them, but they are a really flexible, useful policy to have. And I'm seeing a significant increase of those with people in workplaces at the moment. But also just another one that's been picked up on recently is having those policies where counselling services are included. Obviously, mental health issue has gone, exponential within the workplace. It's one of probably the biggest issues and where people are spending their time managing mental health in the workplace. So having one with a counselling service and maybe a face-to-face occupational health is of a real benefit. So sorry, just to do your selling for you there, Danny, but it's really, really important now with people in the workplace, regardless of age. Actually, I would say it doesn't matter. But just to come back a bit, the government have some recent stats along with some reports that Gallup did last year, and basically what that was saying is that the UK is the least productive country in Europe, basically, from a productivity point of view, and their agenda is very much about getting people back into work, and it's very much about being flexible on policies and things to help people come back. But some other stats that Gallup produced just before Christmas was that 59% of employees were what they call quiet quitters, which means they're disengaged. They turn up every day, but actually they're just looking for another job and they're not that happy in the workplace and not particularly engaged. 18% were actively disengaged, so loud quitters. They're what I would call your ticking time bombs in the workplace, where they go around and they're very noisy about and disruptive about how dissatisfied they are. So when we're looking at what do we need to do to retain people, we definitely don't want to find ourselves in this position where you've got this 59% and 18%. We need to be in a position where we've really thought about what the culture of our organisation looks like. And to be able to do that, not only just with your direct responsibility, but your people management responsibility. So as the manager or the director, or if you've got a combined role, really give some thought to strategies that are going to help this journey for your growth be more harmonious on that sort of, more harmonious with your team. And the first thing I'd like to suggest is that managers are inclusive with their teams. Again, on the back of COVID, definitely younger people pushing the agenda within their workplace. I'm not suggesting people of all age groups don't want this, but the younger generation are definitely pushing it, is making sure that you're inclusive as a leader. And what I mean by that is by making sure that everybody has a voice in your organization. So really making sure that you listen, you understand different people's perspectives, and you explore them with them. So it may not be that it's actually your perspective, and it may be something that's very far removed from where your viewpoint, but understanding what their viewpoint means is that they start to feel more valued. They start to feel that you're interested in them as a person, and we can agree to differ. We can go, okay, well, that's your view and this is mine. We don't need to fall out about it. We don't need to, be difficult with each other. We just need to accept that we have different perspectives and different views. And actually what we're looking for is people who have that level of respect to come and work for you, that can work with you in that way. I think you need to be able to demonstrate that in your words and actions. So you need to be a manager who is asking questions all the time, understanding, and then explaining why. Explaining why we do this. We do this because this is what the journey looks like. This is what the impact is on the next person. This is what it means to the customer. And that explaining why creates a layer of experience, which means that actually people understand what you want from them, and they feel connected to your business. When they feel connected to your business, they feel engaged in your business. And there are many other things that you can do around creating a sense of belonging, making sure that you're acknowledging great work. So celebrating success, not always looking for the negatives, but looking at the things where maybe it's a stretch for the individual, or they've done something outside their comfort zone. And I think one of the things is very, very clearly linked to what I said before about the onboarding, is making sure that you're really clear what's acceptable behavior in your organization. All too often I hear people saying, oh, I've got this conflict going on, I've got this difficult person, and actually they're not difficult at all. It's just we've allowed them to behave in a way which we've not stopped it along that journey, and now it's got into a mountain rather than it being a molehill that we could have dealt with really quickly if we dealt with it at the beginning. So it's don't avoid things in the workplace, is deal with them in a really positive way by setting up meetings, doing their return to works, doing their how you're doing, so that feedback is given and it becomes a culture on the way. And that way then it's not difficult at all, because we're just comfortable having those conversations because that level of trust is there. So just to summarize, I would say really think about what your people management skills are and how you role model that on a day-to-day basis.
Great, thanks, Cathy. And I think that that's absolutely a critical part of being a successful business, is having a successful team. So I'm sure everybody can take an element of that advice. Simon, we're going to come to you next to kind of finally finish off from a legal perspective. But we do also have a question that if you can just answer within your part. So one of our attendees has asked you to talk about the importance of restricted covenants and how to ensure they are enforceable.
Yeah, we can sort of pick it up because obviously what everyone's talked about is really important from a growth perspective. And, you know, the boring bit of it is that it's all underpinned by the legals. And that's ultimately how you sort of ensure that what you're doing is compliant and is ultimately dependable, sustainable and profitable. So, you know, picking up on Ian's point in respect of sort of foreign jurisdictions, what we see a lot with recruitment companies that are looking at growing is that they look at overseas jurisdiction. And at the moment, it's the US. Previously, it's been the Netherlands. Previously, it's been Germany. I went for a period where I think we sort of oversaw the creation of recruitment companies in every country in Europe and out in Asia as well. And the important thing really is that you need to surround yourself with good people who can support you in that journey, if that's part of your growth plan and strategy, because each jurisdiction will have different rules and laws, and no one person can advise you on the laws of every country that you're going to potentially trade in. You know, my qualification, I've spent 7 years learning about how the laws of England and Wales work, not even Scotland, ultimately. So, you know, you'll need to find a German lawyer, a French lawyer, and that sometimes needs to be factored in, because whilst you might have great plans for world domination, you know, one step at a time is really key, because ultimately, you know, it's going to get very expensive and very difficult to manage if you're going out there trying to move wherever you think there's a good business opportunity. And, you know, understanding the compliance regime for each country is really important. So, for example, in Germany, each region has a different set of rules that governs recruitment businesses. In France, if you misclassify someone as self-employed, that can potentially be a criminal offence, which comes back to our discussion about directors' duties. So you don't know what you don't know, and no one knows everything. So it's surrounding yourself with the team of people and being realistic about where you can go and how fast you can go in respect of that. And then really coming on to the people part of it is, again, something else that is quite keen when people are looking at engaging their sort of star performers or looking at growth, when they get an opportunity to perhaps recruit someone who's got a really good business plan about how they can sort of turbo boost your business growth, is traditionally, you know, people have reached into the equity pot and said, here you go, there's 10% of our company to sort of engage you and to give you some skin in the game, if you like, ultimately, which is very attractive. And, you know, that combined with a purpose and all the things that Cathy and Danny were talking about in respect of, you know, those things outside of pay, is really important to people, and especially being part of the journey and seeing the end goal, that can be really motivating and really rewarding. And often those equity discussions happen in a way that aren't really properly thought through. So, for example, if you give away 10% of your business 2 years into trading, there will be a value attached to it. What is that value? Well, you're probably not going to know, but you've just given an employee 10% of that company, and that will come with tax consequences for both the company and for the employee concerned. And one of the reasons a lot of the time that there's a desire to give away equity links into the question that's been raised around restricted covenants, because, and, you know, Cathy mentioned this earlier, if you're sat within a business, you can potentially be wearing 3 hats. a bit of a split personality. You know, you will be an employee because you're working in the business, and by your very nature, you are an employee. If you are a director, either because that's the title you've been given or because you've signed the forms and you become a director at Companies House, you will have director's duties and be wearing a director's hat. And if you're giving shares, you'll be wearing a business owner shareholder hat. And, you know, those three are not mutually exclusive. They can all cross because you are one person at the end of the day. You're not going to divide yourself into three and say, for this decision, I am going to be a director, and for this decision, I'm going to be a shareholder. And one of the reasons that's often used, and we discuss with clients when they're looking at saying, right, okay, we want to put in place a sort of an equity plan sharing the equity amongst our star performers. One of the reasons that's a real carrot or incentive for that is because as a business owner, as a shareholder, the court will treat you differently from the perspective of restricted covenants. And, you know, restricted covenants are probably the most talked about area, I would say, as far as the day-to-day running of a business is concerned in some growth businesses, because you're either recruiting people in who are coming to you with a really good business case that will probably have restricted covenants with their old employer, and you will have people in your business that might want to be looking to move because they don't feel properly rewarded or incentivized, that will have restricted covenants in their contract, and you need to enforce them to protect your business. So you sort of both ends of the scale, really, in respect of the importance of those restrictions. And there's also a lot of duff advice out there in respect of restricted covenants too. You know, I can't tell you the number of times we'll start phone calls and conversations with potential clients along the lines of, these restricted covenants just aren't worth the paper they're written on, and they're just unenforceable. And that might come from experience. It might come from someone down the pub that's told them a story about how it's not worked. But you know, that's a dangerous starting position, because the reality is that over the years, the courts have recognised that businesses do need to protect themselves from unfair, and that's a really important word, unfair competition. So you can't have restricted covenants that just prevent competition per se, but you can have restricted covenants that are enforceable that prevent unfair competition. And really, there are three key elements to that. Is you've got to show a court that you are acting reasonably and necessarily to protect your legitimate business interests. So, you know, the drafting of restricted covenants is absolutely key, and comes back to my earlier point. Just because those restrictions were in your old employer's contract of employment doesn't mean that they are going to work for you. They are enforceable and they're right for you. The other thing that you need to be aware of as well is about how, without getting too technical, but this is an equitable sort of power of the courts to protect businesses. And so we talk about, if a business wants to enforce them, they've got to come to the court with clean hands, which basically means that a business can't pick and choose which terms of a contract they want to enforce. So if you have a commission structure in place and you decide not to pay commission and you're in breach of the contract, the court is going to say, sorry, but you can't come and here and ask us to help you protect your business if you're not going to pay what's due when it's due. Likewise, if holidays have not been paid, or you've terminated someone's employment in breach of contract in some way, they're all practical things that ultimately will prevent a court or make it much more difficult for a court to enforce restricted covenants. So you've got the drafting, you know, are they reasonable? Are they necessary? Do they protect legitimate business interest? You've then got the circumstances surrounding the situation as to what's happened and why you're going to need to enforce them. And then ultimately, you've got to look at really the business case for it. So, you know, the return on your investment. You know, the restricted covenants and enforcing restricted covenants are the most expensive things that we do as employment lawyers. And, you know, they are crucial in some circumstances. But there are other circumstances where they're perhaps not a good way to sledgehammer to crack a nut. So, you know, just because someone's left and there's a client having a conversation with them, but that client has billed, you know, £2,000 in the last 12 months and has not been profitable, are you really going to want to invest the time, the energy, the resources in enforcing the restrictive covenants? You might do if you think that's the slim end of the wedge, but there are different circumstances. And really, the bottom of the line is the reason why lots of people say, look, restrictive covenants aren't worth the paper they're written on, is because they've not been drafted properly. So many time and time again, people will take a standard contract of employment, tweak it, and not really understand the tweaks that they're making. So, for example, they'll remove a definition or they'll change a definition, but they'll not change something in the body of the contract. So, the reality is, yes, they're probably not worth the paper they're written on if the person that's been doing the writing doesn't really know what they're doing in respect of those. And, the starting position is, from a court's perspective, is that they were unenforceable, because if they ever act as a restraint of trade, then they're unlikely to be enforceable. And that's very circumstantial. That depends on the circumstances as to whether it's a restraint of trade. But a really good example is a clause that simply says you cannot work as a recruitment consultant for 12 months after you leave our employment is not likely to be enforceable, because if you've been a recruitment consultant for the last 20 years and that is your profession, that's what you do, why would that be anything but a restraint of trade? You're entitled as an individual to go out there and earn a living and to earn money to support your family and your lifestyle. And a court is not going to simply enforce that type of clause. If, you say you can't go and work for a client, we can't supply services or deal with a client for 6 months after you leave our employment, and the client is defined as someone that you've worked with in the last 12 months before you left our employment, that type of clause is likely to be enforceable. And again, the other thing to really think about when you're looking at, is it protecting legitimate business interests and is it reasonable, is what do you need? And I'll often say to clients is, a court won't help you if you're being greedy. So actually take a step back and sort of say, actually, what do we need? And a good way of doing that is to look at different lengths of restrictions depending on different circumstances. So, for example, you might say that for clients, you can't work for them for 6 months after you leave. But with candidates, you might have a longer period because candidates don't move jobs. You look at your data in your company, and the data in your company says, well, actually, our candidates tend to move around their positions every 2 years. So actually, we might put a case together to say, well, we'll have a 2-year restriction in respect of them. So it's complex, it's difficult, but they are, again, a bit of an insurance product. And again, the reason why people will look at restrictions as potentially a driver for giving equity is that a court looks at someone differently if they're wearing a shareholder's hat, a business owner's hat, than an employee's hat. If you're wearing an employee hat, the court expects the bargaining position to be unequal, i.e. the employer tells the employee what to do. Whereas in a shareholder situation, it's a business-to-business arrangement. Now, the reality is that's not always the case, but that's the court starting point. So if it's a business-to-business on a more equal negotiating footing, then you're likely to have enforceable, longer restrictive periods. And some people see that as a real driver of protecting their business. But, I'd say you've got to mix that in with the practicalities of giving away a percentage in your company. You need a shareholders agreement properly drafted and thought out. You need some provisions in there in respect of restrictions and how that's going to operate on a day-to-day basis. And, if you really want to look at that, then I'd say just because it gives you good restrictive covenants isn't really probably giving out a great message to the people that you're giving out that equity to. And really, if they took a step back and looked at that, that might sort of cause some questions as well. So it's do what is right for you, but don't just simply rush into something. Take a step back, talk to people and give it some thought before you actually sort of say, right, actually, this is the path we want to go down.
Great. Simon, you're absolutely fascinating with the wealth of knowledge that you've got there from a legal perspective. We've had a lot of feedback that's come in through the chat. Interesting, fascinating. Thank you very much. We have had a few other questions that have been posed, but sadly we haven't got time. We've got a minute left on our hour session today, which we have overrun slightly, but I'm hoping that everybody is glad we've kept going because we've kept every attendee, which is great. Just very quickly, Ian, I know you wanted to mention a little surprise that you might have to support some of our recruitment agencies. So 30 seconds over to you to let them know what you've got.
Okay, so given the challenges in the market at the moment, you alluded to that earlier, I would be more than happy to give a free coaching session to anybody who is looking for, to talk on a personal level about their personal experience. So if they want to go through either you or Vicky to do that, that would be great.
Perfect.
Small addition to Simon, I've actually been to court in London defending my right to work many years ago, and I would back everything that Simon's just said. He's 100% right. And the other thing he hasn't said is you get what you pay for. So if you pay for a good solicitor and a good barrister, when you go to court, it really, really matters.
Absolutely. Thanks, Ian. Danny, Cathy, is there anything that you want to add or let anybody know that's available to any of our audience today as a takeaway for yourselves?
We have exclusive simplicity offerings around a discount, access to a quote and buy system, and also the cyber free risk management report, which is a non-invasive attack on your domain, if you know what that means.
And if you don't, contact Danny to find out. Cathy?
Thank you. I'm all done for today, but people can always ring me if they want to talk anything through.
Great, thank you. And finally, Simon, anything that you want to add that you haven't done so already?
No, just the same, really. If anyone wants to reach out and ask any questions, always happy to chat and see what we can do to help.
Super. So thank you very much. It's been absolutely fantastic today. We've heard a huge amount of expert guidance and support for our recruitment agencies that have joined us today. We've had a great audience. Hopefully you've taken a lot from today's session. This is just the start of this growth journey. We'll be coming out with various different webinars that will delve into the detail much more than we've had time to do today. So keep an eye on the Recruitment Startup Hub website for more information. We'll also send a copy of today's recording for any of you that joined partway through. And for those of you who are listening to this webinar after the live session, please do reach out if you'd like to ask any questions or maybe spend some time with one of our partners. So finally, thank you very much to our partners, our audience, and of course, our following on the Recruitment Startup Hub. We look forward to seeing you on the next webinar. Goodbye.
Thanks, everybody.